privacy's going out the window at this
Let's see if it works.
point. Gosh. Uh, mother truck.
Still not working?
No, and I don't know why.
Huh.
I can't for the life of me.
Well,
Hang on. Let me.
I was going to say we may just need to tell everybody to please come in the morning.
No, we're not. There's no way in hell we're doing that. Okay, hang on. I'm gonna try one more thing. Shut his You're gonna hear some creative stuff here in a second. Okay, hang on. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. Get shareable link. Okay, copy. Okay, I think I have a workaround for this. If I can just get into that other confounded pile of crap stream. Okay, here we go.
Think you got it? Mm,
Can you see that text in the chat?
yes. He said, all right, guys. I have a workaround. Go here. Ah. Okay, I do see us on that.
Okay, so you can actually see us, right?
You can see us. Yep. Let's see if the others, hopefully our moderators and everybody are heading over there. Mm, looks like a number of people are in there now.
Okay, we're starting to get people coming into the right stream. Guys, I am so sorry for all of you who are coming in. My goodness, what a joke. Okay. So sorry, everybody. That was just a total joke. I'm going to go ahead and move over the post from the subtitle from the last thread over to here. Gosh.
So we got okay, here come more people. Looks like they're all seeing it and coming in. Okay. Well, shoot.
Sorry again, everybody. My apologies.
Yeah, everybody's saying that they couldn't see anything on the original link, and now they are coming in on this one.
Yeah, something weird on YouTube's end was trying to connect with another live stream for some reason. It would not connect with the old link, so I apologize to all of you. That was our bad. We've been working on this for days, getting this all
Yeah,
set up and pretty and
yeah,
oh boy.
we got it
Anyway,
all
okay.
dialed in.
Well, we have got this actually ready to go now. Okay. Now that I've transferred everything over to this new stream. So sorry. The first thing, guys, that you're going to want to do, for all of you who are in here right now, just to let you know, if you would like to comment in the chat and you have concerns about your identity being displayed in the chat name, it is possible to go in and change your name before you comment in the chat. I'm trying to post the instructions for that right now. Why it doesn't want to let me do it is anybody's guess here. Um, Let me see. Hang on. I'm just trying to move that over from another chat real quick. Okay, I think I've got it now. Okay. Again, guys, so sorry. We'll have this smoother tomorrow morning. Okay, it's not
Hmm.
going to let me. But if you would like to do that, long story short, guys, is you would just open up a new window. Okay, go to YouTube Studio. On the left-hand side, you'll scroll down under your YouTube login. You should already be logged into that screen. There's a little button that says customization. You go ahead and click on that, and then on the right-hand side, there's a tab up along the top that says basics or basic info, and you go ahead and click on that, and then that very first line allows you to change that name to whatever you want. Okay.
Yeah.
Just so you know. So if you would like to chat in here, but you're concerned about your name just being in the chat, if not, no worries. But anyway, we are so sorry. So apologies for that. And our awesome moderators, CCB and the other one whose name Sparkcore39. If you guys could throw those into the Reddit group, that would be great. And extend our sincere apologies again. So anyway, with all that being said, we will go ahead and we'll get started. So thank you for all for being here. By the way, we will go overtime tonight so that we do get a full hour here. So apologies for the late start. I'm just if Mark has to run for some reason, I didn't even check his schedule. Okay, he's going to stick around.
I'm
I was going to
here.
say
I
you might be
am
stuck
here.
with me for the second half because this took so long to begin at the beginning. Well, I believe it or not, I was talking for about 10 minutes to dead air. Mark and I thought we were in the right thing the whole time, and we'll start over again. So, welcome to our Love After Porn Reddit group. We Mark and I became acquainted with this group several months ago through some listeners of our podcast who happen to be moderators in your group. And when we found out about this Reddit thread, Mark and I we just couldn't even tell you how thrilled we were to know that there was a group of almost 50,000, mostly spouses, but also addicts who were kind of collaborating together and trying to find community-based healing from the devastating effects of pornography, sex addiction, compulsion, all that good stuff. For those who don't know, I'm Steve Moore. This is Mark Castleman. We are the co-hosts and co-creators of the Porn Betrayal, Sex and the Experts podcast. It's been in operation now for a little over 4 years. We have a little over 200 episodes, all of which are available online. And we know that many of you watch that, which we very much appreciate. We are also the co-creators of the Dare to Connect program, which has been open and running now for a little over 2.5 years. And just as so happens, we actually launched some really cool new features today, of all things. I don't know what we thought, what we were thinking, trying to do a live stream and expand a major program of ours at the same time, but we did. And anyway, we'll talk a little bit more about Dare to Connect and its role for addict spouses and couples and how it can be of help to people, as well as the special discount that we've elected to offer to all Love After Porn members if that's something you would like to check out, in addition to the usual 2-week free trial that we add to that. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. I am a licensed clinical social worker, a certified sex addiction therapist, a certified partner trauma therapist, and other stuff. Mark is a board certified chaplain and a board certified pastoral counselor. Mark has extensive work in the field of addiction. He has published, I think since we already went through this once, I remember now, 5 books, right, Mark?
Yeah. Yeah.
In addiction, has done numerous trainings and run numerous programs, and worked with people all over the world regarding sexual addiction. And one thing that attracted Mark and I to each other nearly 10 years ago is that our approaches are pretty similar. We're both addicts in long-term recovery. I myself just hit about 9 years of sobriety, and we were both really passionate about the work that we do. We're both very unconventional therapists, and we think that that's a good thing because we do try to bring the very best in clinical training to the table, but also just as if any of you have ever attended a podcast of ours, we get pretty irreverent. Our take on this whole thing is that the issues that every marriage and that those of you who are here are facing are
Mm.
way too intense. Life is too short, and therapy is too expensive to screw around with. And so we like to get right to the point, and we kind of go for the throat on issues. We know that's kind of unconventional, but that's how we like to do it, and people seem to enjoy it. So tonight is going to be a similar thing like that. We do the same thing in our Dare to Connect program, and we'd like to do the same thing with all of you here tonight. This is the first event like this that Mark and I have ever done outside of Dare to Connect or the PBC podcast. We presented different groups and things in person, But as far as a live stream to a broader audience and recordings that are available outside of the Dare to Connect network, we don't do a lot of that. So we just want you to know that we so love, appreciate, and respect every single partner and addict who are here tonight. Or if you're watching this on recording for that matter, you could be anywhere and you're here, which is a big deal. Um, that puts you in a pretty elite category of people who are trying to find healing and hope despite very difficult things. So, with that being said, we do have a list of questions that we received. We're only going to be working on pre-submitted questions tonight. We figured, not even taking into account that complete cluster of tech issues that we had there at the beginning, that it would be. We hope that this will be the first of multiple collaborations with Love After Porn, and would like to do something like this again in the future. But for this first go around, we definitely thought it would be best just to send out a survey, which we know many of you took, where we could have pre-submitted questions all ready to go, where we could present to you guys, and then see how that all went, and then hopefully from there we can kind of expand out and see where other things go. Um, but with that in mind, we have about 10 questions that we pulled from the roughly 25 that were submitted. Our apologies in advance if we don't use one of your questions tonight. We tried to keep a wide variety of questions, and also there were a couple that were submitted that were awesome, but they were so in depth and so in detail that there was no way we could cover it even by tackling some of them within the full 2 hours of tonight and tomorrow. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, this isn't a forum like Dare to Connect, and our time is pretty limited here. We can do that kind of thing over there, and again, we'll talk more about that. But with tonight being what it is, and tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, which we hope you'll be able to join us for that if you have the time as well, or to listen on recording. We wanted to tackle about 5 of those questions tonight, and then 5 tomorrow morning. So that is kind of the plan. Mark, with the second time going through that spiel, hopefully it was as good as the first time. We actually have a real audience this go around. Anything to add before we jump
No,
in?
let's launch into the first question.
Okay, let's make this happen. So let me go ahead and change screens here.
And we
Mark, you want to read this thing off?
Yeah, we chose this one as the first one in the group that we were sent. Steve and I have very tender places in our hearts for all of you partners. We're married to betrayed partners who went through hellish things with us, and we know what that's like through them. We've worked with partners all over the world for a couple of decades now. So when we saw this one, we thought, okay, this has got to be first. And
Yeah.
we just felt the words here. And she says, does it ever get better for the betrayed?
Mhm.
She said, sex is the furthest thing from my mind when I consider everything and everyone he has chosen over me. I don't want to feel like I'm stuck living in his cycles. I have constant brain fog, which is making living a normal life absolutely exhausting.
Mhm.
And we could just so feel where she's coming from. And I think the reason we chose this is we know it's really hard at times to have hope in this process. Sometimes it really does legitimately feel hopeless. And that's why she says, does it ever get better for the betrayed? And so we wanted to talk about, first of all, say yes, it absolutely can and does, and wanted to talk a little bit about how that happens.
Yeah.
Right, with everything she, and we don't know, of course, the personal situation, but you can read a lot between these lines, where she says, talking about the fact that their physical intimacy is not a priority for her based on everything that has happened with his addiction, which is absolutely understandable, and being stuck in on the roller coaster ride with an addict that she talks about here, and how all of this has impacted her. She talks
Mhm.
about brain fog, which is absolutely one of the can be a primary symptom of betrayal trauma, just like we see in PTSD, and just talking about life being absolutely exhausting. And so, Steve, maybe in answering this, we can talk about some of the real basics. How does a partner begin to get her life back? How does a part we Steve, you and I talk a lot about taking back your power.
Yeah.
Much of what we teach partners is about empowering yourselves. And she says not to be stuck in his cycles, regardless of what your addict partner does or does not do. How can you move forward with your life? And a big part of the work that we do is based on helping partners do that. So
Yes.
maybe talking about some of those basics would be a good place to start.
Yeah, no, that would be a great place to start. I was meeting with a spouse of an addict, a new couple that I'm working with just this week, and this almost exact question, word for word, it was phrased a little bit differently, came up as it usually does. When we are doing first meetings, the unfortunate reality, and many of you know this, is by the time somebody makes it to Mark's or I's office, things are usually pretty bad. And there's a real lack of hope going on, either because there were bad experiences with past therapists, or maybe it just took a long time to find a good therapist, or he was resistant, or the finances didn't line up, or whatever.
Hmm.
And I could just kind of see the hopelessness going on for her. And we had a conversation about this. This is one of my really passionate topics, and I tend to get a little fiery about it. But the thing that I said to her is what we talk about oftentimes on Dare to Connect and on the podcast, and that is, you do not and cannot wait for him to get better for you to heal.
Hmm.
It's one of the great, I think, lies that is kind of perpetuated in this business, sometimes even by professionals, unfortunately. When you are doing recovery work in this line of work, rule number one is that there are always three healings in the room. There is the addicts healing and recovery, there's a partners, and then there's the marriages. And the marriage's healing is kind of an amalgam of what's happening with the other two sides to recovery. But oftentimes we make the mistake in this process of kind of looping them all together, right? In order for anyone to move forward, kind of the whole machine has to move together. And that's not true. The marriage very much operates that way, right? If one partner is doing their work, they're accessing the right tools, they're making progress, and the other one is, for whatever reason, not, that does hold back that overall chain. But when it comes to a partner's individual recovery, please do not wait for him to get better. And so kind of with that, the first thing that I would say along those lines, so I don't diatribe, because I can do that. Mark should just cut me off if I do. Um, the thing that I would say is that we need to begin reducing the codependency or codependent elements or feelings in the relationship uh, that the partner may have linked to the marriage in one way, shape, or form or another, right? Now, I want to be really careful with that, because there used to be an old school model that went around the addiction world that talked about, well, a partner just needs to overcome their codependent issues, and if they just do that, then the marriage will get better. The thing that's holding the marriage back is he's getting better and you're not, just because of your codependency. And that used to be kind of this buzzword that just got thrown around the community all the time. And that
Yep.
is absolute nonsense. Okay. So I
Yeah.
want to be really careful with that.
Yeah. And it is really important that we super emphasize that when we use the word codependency, it is not used in the same way that the old model illustrated.
No,
We talk about it in a very different way. So very important to call that out. Yeah.
absolutely. Because, for example, codependency can take lots of different forms. So I'll speak as an addict in recovery for a second. Most addicts can resonate with the idea, and partners can probably resonate with this as well, for better or worse, where an addict oftentimes, sometimes from a place of nefariousness, oftentimes from a place of just a lack of knowledge or understanding, oftentimes they may be blame shifting, or, kind of being in victim mode, or whatever the case may be, will send messages into the marriage that are kind of subtle, but pull a partner in and set them up for a codependency trap. So, for example, I wouldn't have this problem if we just had more sex,
Hmm.
right? If you had bigger breasts, or if you were thinner, or if we were doing different things or exciting stuff in the bedroom, I bet I probably wouldn't have as much of this problem. And Mark and I get really passionate about this topic because, sadly, that message isn't even just perpetuated by the addict. That oftentimes is done by ecclesiastical leaders in certain religious circles. Mark and I have run into that many times. Sometimes even by therapists, which is just shocking. Um, but those kinds of messages, that's just one example among many, where spouses who are looking for help or looking for support, sometimes it even comes from family circles, right? Those kinds of messaging, whether it comes from the culture or whatever it is, oftentimes can set the stage for all sorts of issues where a spouse finds themselves in this place without even realizing it, of, I need to fix him, or this is
Yeah.
my problem, right? Or this is my issue. And when we start talking about this getting better process, right? The going back to the original question, does it ever get better for the betrayed? Yes, it absolutely does. But the first thing that we have to help a spouse do in a whole variety of ways is to distance the link that she has. We're just going to use he and she here. We know that sometimes that's reversed, okay, but we'll just use that because that's the common kind of dynamic with partners being the female. We have to diminish and reduce the unhealthy elements of that link between a partner's self-worth, well-being, and value, and his level of recovery, sobriety, whatever, right? And we have to start pulling those apart. And those are very difficult bonds to break because for most partners, obviously, it makes sense logically, right? He's the one I have sex with. He has a sexual problem. That clearly must mean or may mean that it's some sort of deficit on my part. When the reality is, and we can say this as two addicts in long-term recovery, sexual addiction has shockingly little to do with sex
True. Very true. Yeah.
or sexuality, we should say.
Mhm.
The sexuality is the way that the addiction is manifesting. Okay, that is very much true. But the issues behind it that drive the issue are usually so much more emotionally tied and related that the sex is just the outgrowth. It's the symptomology. Does that make sense? It's
Exactly.
sort of like looking at the flu, right? Oftentimes, and even professionals will sometimes fall into this trap of we go into symptom management, right? Well, if he's acting out in these different ways, well, we've got to compensate for that. And sometimes a wife falls into that, right? I've got to compensate for that, or I've got to do this or that, or whatever the case may be. And the reality is that you could look like, act like, be like his brain's quote unquote favorite porn star, and it would never be enough. It would never be enough.
Yeah.
Um,
We
reality,
and we have some other questions tonight that are going to go right into that issue of
yes, they do. Yes,
comparison. This she has to. I don't want to feel like I'm stuck living in his cycles.
yes.
I can
So
tell
the
you
ups
from.
of his ups and the downs of his
Oh
downs,
my
right?
gosh, this was so true in my dark addiction days with my wife and so many partners I've worked with. Here's the thing. For all of you partners listening, I am amazed. Steve and I are both amazed by your capacity to nurture, your capacities to forgive, your capacities to have courage and resilience. It's quite shockingly amazing how much you put up with
Mhm.
regard to addiction and the cycles that you can get stuck in. So my wife used to get stuck in this cycle where I would play victim mode. Woe is me. Steve calls it his Eeyore mode. I know that all too well. And she would run to the rescue, and
Mhm.
she would try to nurture me and meet my needs. Why? Because she could tell that I was going into that mode, and it would disrupt our entire family and our entire lives. So she felt responsible to come and rescue me so things could go smoothly. And you can
Mm,
understand that. It was very
yeah.
understandable that she would do that. But it ruled over her life. And like this person says, it became absolutely exhausting to keep track of my stuff, our kids' stuff, his stuff, our home stuff. She was doing it all. And it wasn't until she began to detach herself from taking responsibility for my stuff. Finally, when she started to do that, she started to get a more normal life.
Yeah.
She has, my wife has a favorite saying, I don't know all what y'all are doing over there, but you get to own your side of the street and I get to own mine. And
Yes.
she started to hold those boundaries with me. And Steve and I talk a lot about boundaries with partners. And when she would see I was having a down day, she would say, I'm so sorry you're having a bad day. I hope that you choose to tap into your support system and do your work. I'm going to go off and do what I had planned today. If you have something you need to check in with me, let me know. Hope you have a good day. And she would head off. And boy, for a while, I would just get really angry that she was detaching from my drama triangle, that
Mhm.
she
Yeah.
was choosing to take back her power and live her life, loving me and hoping that I would get my act together, but not dependent on my doing so. Right? Very important
Yes.
part of this process.
Yeah. Well, and kind of going back to that, and I know we need to move on to other questions here. So I love Mark tactfully redirecting me because I'll just go off on a tangent here. I can talk about this all day. But there are a number of good first steps that we could recommend for you just to get you started. Okay. The first would be engagement with some sort of a qualified a 12-step based support group for partners. Um, 12 step, now there are a lot of those out there. We can give you a few just to give you an idea. Some of the major ones would be S-Anon. So SANON, if you go to sanon.org, is a good place to begin looking for a good solid fellowship. SA Lifeline, if you Google that, is another good one where they have a lot of good partner support groups. There are others out there. SLAA, there is a partner equivalent to that. The SLAA is technically for the addict side. But those are all valuable sources of beginning this process. And I'll tell you why. I know that many of you may deal with some spiritual trauma, spiritual wounding, and I myself was one of those, absolutely, when I got into recovery. Um, the reason why we would recommend something like that and to be and at least considering or moving through some of the 12-step based principles that are contained in those kind of fellowships is because, well, first of all, they're psychologically and research based proven to work. And I think that one of the reasons why that's the case is because the very first thing that is taught in any good 12-step recovery group is is the immediate division between his side of the street and your side of the street. And it's put in very black and white terms. And all of the steps, quote unquote, the 12 steps are kind of modeled around this idea of focusing on the things that you can control while learning how to, quote unquote, surrender the difference. Right. And so there's an immediate intervention, I guess you could say, in 12-step circles with a lot of what this partner is describing.
Yeah.
Um, Now, there is, unfortunately, even in healthy attachment, right, there is no way to um, not be hurt by his stuff, right? Because you love him, you care about him, and relationships are supposed to be attached, right? And there's no way to get around that. But there's a big difference between being hurt by that versus like this partner so well said, right? I'm stuck living in his ups and downs, right? Mark and I both have wives who very much were caught in these cycles from a loving place, right? Um, Codependency or codependent traits are oftentimes described as love unchained, right? Love without boundaries,
Love without boundaries is a good way to say that.
right?
Yeah.
Boundaryless love. And so we know that so many partners get caught in that place from a place of wanting to love their partner, love their marriage, want to, be there and be supportive and fulfill the gap that be a support they signed up to be, when they first said I do or engaged in that relationship, whatever it may be. But healthy living within a relationship with somebody who is struggling, whether it's with sex addiction or frankly other issues, comes with the reality of recognizing that loving him means loving him as he is, and recognizing, we talk a lot about this in Dare to Connect, recognizing his own sovereign agency, which means that he has a universe given right to be or not be whatever he chooses to be. As a mentor of mine once said, people have a God given right to destroy their lives. And that's the reality of that, right? And it's so difficult and painful for a spouse to watch that and to be a part of that process and to watch a partner make choices that they know are going to be hindering and holding back the relationship or their partner individually. But the minute we begin to honor that agency of another person and in a way that is healthy, and we begin to love them in that light, and we pair it with other tools like Mark said, including boundaries, learning how to surrender that difference, that's when we start to make a healthy break from that.
Yeah.
And you start living in that place where when he's ready, when he gets to that point where he can actually receive healthy support from you, you will be in a position to be able to give it in a healthy way, if that makes sense.
And a big part of that is getting to, and this was what was pretty tough for my wife and a lot of partners I work with initially. It's very hard for them to break away from their partner as their primary support system.
Yeah.
When you've got a partner who's stuck in addiction, he cannot be your primary support system. And so you start to look outside for other parts of your primary support system, like 12-step groups, like really close, trusted, trustworthy friends or family members. You begin to develop what is a higher power for you, which can mean many things, which I see came up on the chat. Doesn't have to be the typical God or religion. Can be a support group like Reddit. It can be nature. It can be universal love. Lots of things, but something outside of you that you can connect up with so you don't have to rely upon him for your happiness, your peace, right? For your connection, because he's not in a place to be able to give that. until down the road that he's done some long-term serious recovery. The other part of this that we invite all of you is you just have to get into a routine and a pattern of self-care and taking good care of yourselves. What does that mean for you? We talk an awful lot about things like journaling. We talk about, taking quiet, peaceful time to sequester yourself off to be able to renew and to regroup, with yourself. So lots of forms of self-care, fulfilling things that you're pursuing rather than just being stuck in a rut with him because he's not progressing. You find ways to progress.
Mm,
So these are all parts of your outside primary support system that used to be primarily him.
yeah.
And now you'll find as you do that, it's not that you don't love him, don't care about him, but you just decide not to stay on that roller coaster ride because, as she says, it's exhausting, it's consuming. I'm stuck. And
Yeah.
we want to encourage everyone to take back your power to become empowered to direct your own life. So we should
Yes.
we should jump right into the next question. We're
We should. Yeah, and there's some good questions coming up in the chat about boundaries. We have some other questions that are actually, I believe, coming up either tonight or tomorrow morning that focus on those. So we will definitely talk more about boundaries tonight. So
it's a big topic. Big,
yeah,
big.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
we
yeah.
will definitely come back to that. And thank you, mods, for giving some resources from past PBSC podcast episodes. You guys are awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah, I
for
love it.
that.
Yeah, let's jump to this next question that came in.
Okay. All right, here we go.
Yeah, many
So,
participants, me included, struggle so much with the choice of content our partners were using to act out with.
mm,
In most all cases, the complaints are relating to the content being the complete opposite of what we look like and how we behave. What insight can you provide to us partners that struggle with comparing ourselves and feeling terrible for looking nothing like these other women? Is there a way I can help my own thought process here? I try to provide myself with positive self talk and not put myself down. But after nearly 2 decades of this with my husband, I can't help but feel completely inadequate. My husband tries his best to make me feel beautiful, but I'll be honest, I don't believe he really feels this way about me. That was just so vulnerable and just so transparent in sending that in. Yeah, that is such a common struggle that so many partners have. Yeah,
yeah.
very well stated.
And as always, our hearts so go out to what's being
Mhm.
talked about and discussed here. If we kind of dial in on this, what insight can you provide to us partners that struggle with comparing ourselves
Yeah,
and feeling terrible for looking nothing like these women? Is there a way I can help my own thought process here?
yeah,
Part of that, I think that there are multiple ways to come at that. Recovery is there. There are no silver bullets in this process, as we talk about oftentimes. Um, and I when part of it we kind of talked about in answer to the last question a little bit. If you take a look at this, when you start to understand the nature of addiction, and so let's do talk about that for a minute. Addiction is an illness, right? It is very much an illness. It is a condition that one struggles with. And Mark and I, again, this is where we can kind of jump in, not just professionally but personally. I mean, I remember being in my addiction world, just speaking to my own, my own reality. And when I was in an addiction mindset, I would oftentimes, 90% of the time, right, I'd be going around living my life and I'd be in kind of what I'd call normal mode, right? And then I would run across some sort of a trigger, an emotional stressor in my life, something happening, in the background. Maybe it's something sexualized that comes across my view or whatever, and I would be triggered into what we call sometimes in Dare to Connect hunt mode, right? Where the brain makes that switch from just being I'm living my life, doing my normal thing to it's moving down what we refer to as the addiction cycle. It's looking to escape, it's looking to medicate, it's looking to whatever. And in that world, a lot of things happen in the mindset of an addict. Most of them are kind of subconscious, and it's hard for most addicts to kind of see that without, when they're not in a clear headspace. And one of those is that we just become highly objectifying, right? We begin to break down and strip away the humanity of the people around us. in different ways, not just sexually, but even other ways as well. That's kind of a conversation for another time. But the brain starts to break down people less into people and more into assets or deficits, whether that's through a sexual lens or some other sort of lens, right? This is a thing or an entity that can take me further to where I want to go, meaning, to a place of escape and numbing out, or not, right? Because addiction is the addict mindset is all about escape and all about running and all about coping, right? It's all about survival. It has nothing to do with living in the present. Addiction is the opposite of all of those things. And so when one is in that addiction mindset, um, I mean, this is hard to even describe even now because even though we talk about it all the time, when one is in that addiction mindset, you become so invested in just the sexualized nature of looking for something that's new or novel, right? We talk about it, Mark, being the new shiny object, right?
Yeah.
The brain is just looking because it's on this hunt for escapism. And it's on this hunt for being able to numb out or live in fantasy or whatever the case may be. In that world, that fantasy world, the people, the thoughts, the feelings, the reality that the brain lives in isn't real, right? It's a myth. And
And I think the
for
important thing about this is, and we always are really quick to say this, none of this is intended to be any excuse making for an addict
no,
whatsoever.
not at all.
It's an explanation, but it doesn't
Yes.
relieve the addict of accountability or responsibility. The thing that was so shocking for me when I got into real recovery and was actually able and willing to look back at that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? Mr. Hyde that would close everyone off, that would objectify, turn people into things, as I call it. And quite frankly, I turned myself into a thing. That's not often talked about. We don't just objectify others in addiction mode, we objectify ourselves.
Yes.
It's things doing something to things. And so what goes out the window? All human intimacy, all true connection, all true relating. And we just go into this very narrowed, I call it looking at people and the world through a drinking straw, this little teeny tiny little narrow place that we see ourselves and others. And that's an explanation of it. Of course, it's every addict's responsibility and accountability to decide, does he want to come out of that narrowed place? Does he want to stop objectifying others and himself and begin to seek true, intimate human connection, true caring, true empathy, true love, right? All of these things are part of that. I think the reason Steve's bringing that whole thing up about addiction is because it comes back to this comparison. I
Yes.
remember many years ago, I'm not going to say who it was, but it was really telling. In Hollywood, there was this female actor who was declared the most perfect physical person in all the world. She was absolutely right, the absolute ultimate of physical appearance, number one on all the total globe. And here was the crazy part: her husband was actually having multiple affairs and hooked on pornography and all of this fantasy world he lived in, and he was married to the most perfect person on earth. You look at it and go, wait, what? How is that possible? It's because of what we're talking about today. It wouldn't matter who you were being compared to. You can't compare to the fantasy narrowed world of addiction. It's impossible.
Reality will never square
Never. And we're
with the
inviting
fantasy
you,
world.
we're inviting you to take back your power and not allow that to happen for you because you
Absolutely.
can't. And we know it's very legitimate. Of course, you want to be desired more than his sexual outlets. But of course, you want to measure up. Of course, you want to be the apple of his eye and all of these things. And our hearts go out to all of you who strive and are trying to be that. But it's a dead end journey. And taking back your power and starting to really come into the place of your sense of worth, your sense of value, your sense that you're a beautiful, amazing, fantastic person is something that we help partners all the time to basically take back that territory. That's not his
Yeah.
territory, that's your territory.
Very
Yeah.
well said. Very well said. Rebecca in the chat said, can that happen without him being conscious of it? And the answer to that, again, even though that doesn't diminish accountability, yes. That would happen with me all the time, even in highly inappropriate places. I remember more than once walking into church and my brain just starts undressing everybody in the room. Right? It's
Mm.
just automatic. It's not even something you'd think about.
And
Um,
and that's true. You get deep enough in addiction, you do go on autopilot. Again, that
Absolutely.
doesn't relieve responsibility or accountability because
No,
how did you get there? We got there by making hundreds or thousands of choices to do so until
exactly.
repetition over and over and over again. Now the brain just does it automatically. I got myself there into that autopilot place, but very much so. I remembered, and this is a very raw thing for me. I remember when I would call it coming to myself, when I would act out an addiction in that mindless, outrageous place, and then I would come to myself after the acting out. I remember just sitting on the back porch of my house, just weeping bitterly. I would
Yeah.
1 or 2 in the morning sitting on my back porch with my face in my hands, just crying and crying because I could not believe what I had done. Right. There's that Dr. Jekyll Hyde syndrome that is just so tragic. But I got myself there through years and decades of choices. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So again, ladies, we know that we're just kind of, and gentlemen who are here as well, we know we're just kind of skirting the beginnings of these, and we'd love to jump down any one of these. Mark's going to keep me accountable, so we don't. But hopefully that at least gives you kind of a starting point and an understanding. And I love what I appreciate Mark bringing up this idea. We do talk about it oftentimes on the podcast and in other forums, but uh, uh, excuses, reasons are never excuses. Reasons
Never.
give context, but they do not diminish accountability,
Nope.
right?
Nope.
And we'll talk more about that as some of these other questions come up, I would imagine. So,
Yeah, let's
uh,
go to the next one.
yeah, let's do. Let's go ahead and flip over here. Okay, I'll read this one. My husband has supposedly quit acting out after I found out he was using porn last year, but I have a hard time believing that he was just able to quit with no therapy or intervention. I'm still really struggling with betrayal trauma and the urge to continue to look through his devices because I feel like I want to know what else he was looking at and when. I know this is unhealthy for me, but I'm not sure how to move forward. And then she asks a couple of questions. The first is, would you recommend couples therapy in our case? And then she moves down to the next sentence, which is very well thought out. Collective wisdom holds that an addict can only ever truly recover if he is doing it for himself when rock bottom has been reached. If rock bottom is losing the person he cares most about and has built a life with, does that still count as recovery for himself?
Mm, I can
Great question.
speak authoritatively to this one.
I gab a lot. Go for it, Mark.
No, I can tell you exactly what this was like for me. So we talk about rock bottom. You have to hit rock bottom where things get so desperate, things are so horrible, things are so awful that the addict is forced to make a decision to change. I will tell you that rock bottom did not work for me. I'm what I call a bottom walker. I would hit rock bottom in my life and I would just walk along the bottom
Mm,
and just stay there. Now, I will tell you that there was something that happened that really was a big, not a 2x4 up against my head, more like a 12 by 12, because it took a bigger piece of wood to get me to look at stuff seriously. But my wife did finally come to me in holding her boundaries and just said, I love you, but I'm not willing to live with the man that you have become. And it shocked me to the core that she would, because she was always a nurturer. She was always loving and understanding. And then she just comes and says, I will not continue like this. And if you don't find a way to, in essence, get your act together, I may be done. And it just shocked me. Now, here's what happened, and here's what I'm reading in this question. That did get me serious initially to get on a recovery path. So Steve and I will say we've done groups, for example, over the years where guys end up in our therapy groups in a room. I've had guys come into group, they'll sit in the chair, their arms are folded, they have this really huffy look on their faces. They do not want to be there, and they have no qualms in letting you know.
mm,
I'm resistant and stubborn to even be in this room. And I would not get pulled into that attitude because here was my thought. I don't care what got your butt in this door, you're here. You're here. Now what are you going to do next?
yes.
So that rock bottom stuff can start the process of recovery, but is that recovery? My answer to that would be it is not. It's the initial walking through the door. And here's the problem. If we rely on rock bottom to get us into recovery and keep us there, rock bottom will wear off. We will get complacent again. The nastiness of that immediate situation will, the further times goes by, the more it goes into the distance, and it no longer motivates me at the level that it did. And if that's all that I'm having to keep me in recovery, I will slip back into my addiction behaviors. It's only a matter of time,
Hmm.
even if it's years down the road. So there's more to recovery than just being motivated by rock bottom stuff.
Yeah. Oh, I love how Mark covered that. I'll just add a couple of supplemental thoughts to that. I very much agree with where Mark is at. I mean, speaking to my own experience, I wish I could look at this group and say, you know what? I just woke up one day and said, you know, I should be a better human, and I should be done with addiction. I thought
Should.
that many times, but that never happened. My Mark and I's stories are very different in some ways, but they're very similar at this point. My wife and I more or less had a similar encounter where she said, "Look, I love you and I care about you, but you can't continue choosing this and have me too. And you need to decide which world do you want." And at the time, she didn't say it this way, but she was offering the choice of, am I going to choose a world of connection and reality, or a world of fantasy and just never ending escape? Because that's what I'd been
Mhm.
choosing. And I was trying to live in both worlds. And she was stating what we both kind of knew, but she had the courage to say, which is that that is not possible. And so I had to kind of make that choice. And when I first went to my first 12-step group, guys, I speak as kind of the ultimate hypocrite here, because here's the crazy part. I was running a intensive outpatient program for chemical addiction at the time when this whole thing happened. I was helping people get better from addiction while concealing my own. And there was a whole lot of shame with that, because people were actually getting better under my care, but I was like just not.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I was kind of the ultimate hypocrite. And when I first got into recovery, when I went to my first 12-step meeting, I didn't go there to get better. Um, I went literally for the following reason. If I go to these meetings, I'll now be quote unquote working on it, and that will get Brittany off my back. And
Yeah, right.
maybe I can keep this marriage together a little bit longer,
Yeah, I'll get her off my back.
right? Because
Or
now I'm
yeah,
really serious, quote unquote. I'm working on it.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Um,
and what was said here in this question is collective wisdom holds that an addict can only ever truly recover if he's doing it for himself.
yes.
Now, that almost always doesn't start out as the reason a guy gets into recovery.
No.
I didn't initially do it for myself. I did it because my wife, for the first time in my marriage, said, I may need, I honor your right to keep doing what you're doing, but I also honor my right to say I'm not participating in it anymore.
Yeah,
And that made me go, ooh, I better make some changes here. Was that
for
just
sure.
for me? Partially because I love her and I wanted to be in the relationship, but it wasn't just for. So I guess contrasting that with where I am today, why do I stay sober? Because today I want to live in the higher me.
Yeah.
I What used to drive me crazy in addiction is I knew that there was a better part of me in there somewhere that was wanting to come out. I knew that I was better than what I was doing. I knew that there was a higher, truer, more authentic self that hopefully could develop someday. Today, I protect that authentic self. I
Yeah.
don't want to go back to addiction because it would be a violation of what I consider to be my true self. And I'm not willing to sacrifice that. Now, it
Well,
took a long time for me to get to that place.
absolutely. Well, and if we were to kind of sum it up, there's probably a good way. Most of the time, what we see in our offices and our clinics and Dare to Connect, and our own experience lends itself to this, is that what we call the externals are what bring us to the table of recovery. That's the reality, right?
Yeah.
External consequences mount. Guys, again, it's very rare when a guy says, you know what, I just have X amount of money to spend per hour on therapy, and I really don't have anything going on Thursday afternoon, so I think I'm just going to come see you. That does not happen, right? Why do guys come to us or why do they show up and dare to connect? She told me I'm done. It's either we do this or I'm out. My job caught me looking at porn on the job site and they said you do this one more time and you're out of here, right? Those externals are usually what bring us to the table. And what I would say to that is God bless the externals. Because if the externals are what bring us to that point where we can begin to do the recovery for the internals, even though that won't sustain a long-term recovery plan, if a guy will invest because of the externals for long enough to start to see the internal benefits, start to see the mindfulness that can happen, start to see the reality that maybe they could change or become better, because that's the catch 22 that so many guys find themselves stuck with. And Mark and I talk about this all the time. They, like Mark just indicated, they want to believe that they can change, but deep down, they've kind of resigned themselves to the fact that they never will be able to,
Exactly.
because 10, 20, 30, 50 years of their evidence-based brain and their experience has taught them they can't, because they haven't had the right tools. And that's
Right.
where I was, right? Mark and I were both in that place. We just kind of resigned ourselves to the idea that this was just going to be a something that we were going to manage. There wasn't a cure. We were just going to have to manage this
Just manage it.
like a
Yep.
chronic condition, right?
Yep. And the problem was we wouldn't, and I know you did this for a while too, Steve, we wouldn't stay with recovery long enough
No.
to see the evidence start to manifest that we could change. I would bail way too quick when stuff wasn't happening as fast as I thought it should, and I would just go back to my old behaviors. I
Yes.
didn't hang in long enough to start to peel back the onion to get to the true issues of my addiction. The acting out was just the surface symptoms, but what was underneath it? You have to hang in long enough to get to the underneath. And once you start working on that stuff, now you start to feel the amazingness of recovery. Oh wow, this is about my shame. This is about my fear. This is about my childhood traumas. This is about my selfishness. This is about my thinking errors, right? But you got to hang in long enough to be able to get to those things.
Absolutely. No, it's so true. So that's where that's where various different interventions can come on board, because there is an element to this process of faking it till you make it, right? Trusting the process enough to allow, like Mark said, to see the benefits to come forward to where you could start to consider it, right?
Yep.
Um,
And not, I call it, don't bail too soon.
yeah,
I'll
absolutely.
see guys on the recovery ship and they've been doing some really good work and then they jump off the side and swim away back towards their addiction. I'm like, no, you bailed just too soon. What are you
Yeah.
doing?
Yeah. And I guess the heartfelt capstone that I would say to this is that, when I got to that place of doing it for my wife for the external reasons, thank God for Brittany at the time,
Yeah.
because the reality was is I didn't love myself. I wasn't worth doing it for at the time. I didn't
No,
feel anyway. I didn't feel that way. I felt I was a lost cause. But the woman I was married to deserved something better.
he was worth you doing it in the beginning.
And that was okay to start. It
That's okay
wasn't
to
it
start.
wasn't it wasn't going to sustain it, but it was okay as a start.
Okay to start it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, okay.
Go on to the next one.
Yep, let's keep moving here. All right.
I can do this one. Would
Okay.
you be able to discuss why some pornography addicts end up acting out to people they know in real life as opposed to just strangers online? While other addicts are able to fully compartmentalize and keep their real life completely separate from their acting out. Does acting out to people they know in real life indicate a more serious addiction? My partner used my friends, my family members, his friends, as well as pornography to act out. I worry sometimes that I'm an idiot for deciding to stay with him while we both work our recovery programs after such an intense betrayal. Thanks for everything you do. Me and my partner love your podcast. It helps us through some tough times. This is, I can speak real quick to this. I, part of my early work in this field, which was, gosh, it's been almost 25 years now when I first started in this field. I wanted so desperately to understand the brain science, the neuroscience behind why an addict does what an addict does. I was so confused by why I could be a really decent guy on the one hand and then turn into this totally cold, selfish animal on this other hand. And I wanted to know why. And so I did deep, deep research into the neuroscience of addiction. Some of my colleagues and I were the early pioneers My first book was the Drug of the New Millennium, the brain science behind pornography addiction. That was back in the day when we used to be ridiculed by the psychology world that pornography wasn't an addiction at all,
Sex
and
addiction was a myth.
it was a myth. And we went out on a limb to say no, this rewires the human brain in some massive ways. Of course, that's all become mainstream now. But one of the things I discovered back then, I you just simply can't explain many of these aspects of addiction. And this question here is, well, what about guys who act out with real people versus those who just stick to fantasy? Is that guy who's acting out with real people a deeper addiction, a worse addict? I don't know. It's hard to quantify or qualify and put people into categories with addiction because it affects the human brain in such personal, individual ways. Is one worse than the other? I don't think so, because I've had guys come into my therapy groups, for example, and a guy will say, "Well, I just look at pornography," and another guy's sitting here saying, "Well, I've been with escorts and I had affairs. I'm way worse than that guy sitting down here in the other chair," and I would disagree. The guy with pornography can have just as deep an addiction, and in some ways that I've seen, can have just as much destruction. And so I know it's tempting to say, well, we can put gradation to addiction. Well, acting out with people has to be worse than the guy that just fantasizes. It depends on the individual. You've had partners, Steve, that you worked with who said, I would have been more, it would have been easier for me if my partner had had an affair with a single person than knowing he's looked at tens of thousands of naked women
Yes,
in
absolutely.
pornography.
Well, and
And
so
just
much
the
of that,
opposite. Some have said he can look at the fantasy, but if he's ever with a human being, that's it.
yeah.
How different that is.
Once, and a lot of that has to do with this idea that we talk about oftentimes in Dare to Connect about, trauma lies in the eye of the beholder,
Very
right?
much so.
Meaning that, the way that the brain, resonates with an experience and labels it as trauma or how much of it is traumatic versus not, right, ties in with this whole idea of a million factors that are happening subconsciously, ranging from my background to my family upbringing to, my past history and relationships to if do I have indigestion at the time, right? I mean, there's all of these things that kind of come into play that the brain then makes a conclusion and says this is traumatic and initiates a trauma response, and to what degree that does. And so when you're talking about this idea of is it worse for is it worse, quote unquote, on the part of an addict to be acting out to people that they know versus not, fantasy or not? I think that as with anything, that there is a potential for that being a problem, but I wouldn't say that that would be an inherent right reason for labeling a person's addiction as more quote unquote far gone. In fact, when you look at the psychology of addiction and when you think about sex addiction in particular, sex addiction is in the clinical world is what would be referred to as an attachment disorder, right? So it's a failure to correctly attach and to form healthy and to manage healthy relationships and communication and connection styles.
Mm-hmm.
And so, not to go too much into the clinical stuff, I don't think that's what you guys are here for tonight, but I love that stuff. When you look at when you look at how we attach and you look at the emotional immaturity, and we say that with all the respect in the world that many addicts carry, because of various deficits, whether it's trauma from their past or a lack of modeling, which are all things that oftentimes set the stage for a guy to get stuck in addiction initially. And again, that's a discussion for another day. That's when you start to look at it through that lens, it actually makes a lot of sense why a lot of addicts, and I will throw myself into the ring, I'll be totally vulnerable with you. I would frequently act out fantasy wise in my brain to people that I knew.
Good.
That would happen quite a
Yeah.
bit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was actually a very common occurrence. And as I look back now through the lens of 9 years of sobriety, through a lot of training and all the other things that I do professionally, I would say that a good chunk of the reason why that was the case is because oftentimes that was my brain's very immature, very dysfunctional way. And I know this may sound weird to anybody but an addict, but of trying to quote unquote connect with those people, right? Because part of the mentality around sexual addiction is that, and one of the lies that the brain is taught and that it reinforces through acting out is that connection is manifested exclusively through sex, right? In Dare to Connect, we're talking about topics like this right now, where normal connection happens through, I don't know if we were just to give it a rough list of 10 areas, right? Mark has a list of that we use in Dare to Connect called the 8 areas of intimacy, right? Eight different forms of ways in which we connect with other people. And that would just be, probably a baseline level. But for an addict, what pornography rewires the brain to think and to feel, and other forms of sexually acting out do the same thing, is that sex, instead of it being one method of connecting, it is the method of connecting.
And we look at that, and as we do, this is where the deep work of peeling back the layers comes in. And I began to have others help me to look to say, Mark, why do you go to this solely sexual outlet to gain your human connection? What's going on with you that you would just seek that little tiny narrow space for that? Well, it was shame, it was embarrassment, it was awkwardness, it was lack of social skills, it was narcissistic, self-centered tendencies that I developed to protect myself as a kid. It was a fear of being vulnerable. It was a fear of being seen for my whole self. And you add all that stuff together, and it's like, there's no way I'm going to go connect with those people in a real authentic way. I'm going to go get this substitute connection through these sexual outlets. It's
Yeah,
easier, it's less scary, it doesn't take maturity or development. So I'm just going to go do that. And I started
absolutely.
doing that when I was 13 years old in the awkwardness of my teenage years, right? Not knowing how to connect with peers, the hellish experience of junior high. It's like the
Yes.
worst time of my life.
Absolutely. I mean, you think about those tendencies that we all have, right? Especially in our earlier years, right? An averseness to rejection, et cetera, right?
Mhm.
You can see why those of us who were emotionally immature or deal with a traumatic background are especially subject, to being caught into that, right? I mean, I myself, my dad died in a plane crash at 13. I had all these negative feelings, all this anger to put somewhere, nobody to vent it on, right? All of this trauma that I wasn't doing anything with. And then all of a sudden, I entered sexual maturation. I discovered
Yep.
porn, I discovered masturbation, and my brain, I was hooked from acting out instance one
Yes.
because for 5 minutes, I felt loved. I felt connected to, I felt like I belonged. And I didn't feel any of those things all the time because of all
Yeah.
those other things that were going on. And I didn't even know what I was doing at the time because I wasn't really well versed in sexuality. But I do remember my brain etching in granite somewhere in the back of my subconscious saying, we don't know what the hell that was, but we are doing that again
Yeah.
because that was amazing.
And this
Right.
whole discussion brings us to this summary place that's hard for a lot of people to understand. But what does it say? The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection.
Yes.
And when you learn that and you really do that, you hang in long enough with recovery to do the deep work, one day you just go, whoa, wow, there it is. That's what I was craving that whole time. Real connection, real intimacy, real transparency, real authenticity. But I didn't have the skills. Maybe I didn't even have a big enough desire to go seek that hard path to connection. And when you realize that's what it's about, it's huge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's huge. Was that
Okay.
our whole group of questions for that we had?
No, I think
We have
we've
one more.
got, let's see. I
I think
think we have,
there one more. Oh,
let's see, we had
no.
one, two, three, four. Um, we have one more here. Okay. This is number five. I can go ahead and read this.
Yeah.
My partner says it really just didn't occur to him that by doing everything he did, he would be hurting me. Not
Mm,
while he was acting out or even when we spoke about it. He didn't think he necessarily lied because his action recessed to the back of his mind. That was an interesting phraseology. His actions recessed to the back of his mind. And even though he came up, and even though this came up in conversation, and she says in parentheses, and I routinely asked for after D Day, which for those who may not be familiar with that term is disclosure day, to which he lied. I take this to mean he didn't hurt me knowingly, but I just can't believe that. I've said to him that by doing what he did, he chose porn over me. He just doesn't think so because it was never a choice he was consciously making. Is this true? Is he trying to mislead or lie to me, or does he really believe that? And then the last kind of follow up question to that is this common for addicts?
wow.
Mark has a lot to say about this one. I already know.
That's a
So
that's a big
gotta
topic.
toss it to him
Yeah,
for
that's
a
a
second.
big topic. And this is where we really start to get into this place of what am I? So when I hear the word responsible or accountable, I hyphenate them. What things as an addict am I really response hyphen able? In what ways am I account able? So if I've rewired my brain through going to these sexual outlets so that I become very narrowed in the way I see myself and people, I shut myself off from, sometimes we get so deep in addiction we don't even feel shame or guilt about it anymore. Does that mean that I'm not hurting anyone now? If I don't recognize what I'm doing because I've done it for so long and it's become so automatic, then I'm not account able or response able for it. That's not true. Now, this guy may have gotten to the place where he literally became so unaware because his brain was so rewired that it didn't occur to him that he was hurting his wife or his partner. That is possible. I got to that place. I got to that place where this became such a part of my life that I literally shut feelings about my wife out. And it was just second nature. I would act out and wouldn't even consider what it was going to do to her, how it was betraying her, how it would hurt her. I literally got into the place where I became so numb in my addiction that stuff was just out of sight and out of mind. So is that possible? It is. But does that mean that he's not accountable or responsible for as she says that by doing all that he chose porn over her? He did. He did. Now, the rewiring state that he got to in his brain doesn't mean that he wasn't, quote, consciously making choices. He was. I was always making choices all along the way. Those choices became easier and easier and easier the longer I did them and the more repetition I engaged in. But I was nonetheless still making choices. Make no
Mhm.
mistake. The
Yeah.
more rewired my brain became, the more quickly I would make the choice. And the path was just smooth. There goes Mark, without even thinking about it. But I was still accountable for doing so.
Yes,
It's a big mistake that addicts make is what's being expressed here.
for sure. Well, and I'll just kind of add to that real quick before we move on to a few things. Try to add answers a few of these questions in the chat, and then wrap up with some thoughts about Dare to Connect. But with me, we were actually talking about this in Dare to Connect not too long ago, and I made the following statement in D2C. I said, addicts would make excellent CIA agents.
Excellent CIA agents. Yeah.
And that is a true statement. I say that tongue in cheek a little bit, but it's the truth. And what I mean by that is that it is shocking how good at what we call compartmentalization. It's shocking how good we can become at compartmentalizing different areas of our life. An addict would be the ultimate CIA agent because what does the CIA want? It wants somebody who can go out, do a bunch of really scary stuff during the day, go home at night, kiss and hug their wife, and just kind of leave one world separate from the other. Now, psychologically, that isn't healthy, nor is it sustainable long term, as Mark and I have learned the hard way. But in a temporary sense, we would all be really good at that. When you when you look at I think the big thing that I would add, just to reinforce what Mark's thoughts are, because I have lots I could say about this, but I know we're coming up against time, is that yes, is this absolutely possible? Absolutely. I can also tell you though that there on the other side of the coin, there is a possibility that for us addicts who struggle with really immense thinking errors is the topic that is the main topic for Dare to Connect. We're starting for the next month on Monday. Um, one of the those some of the more popular thinking errors that we addicts struggle with, like denial, right, minimization, justification, right? I mean, there are all sorts of ways in which we addicts justify, make okay the behaviors that we engage in, right? Uh, the brain has to some way, in order to sustain an addiction that the brain knows goes against its own moral compass, in order to be able to resolve what we call that cognitive dissonance, where it's doing things that it knows aren't authentic, it has to be able to justify that. It has to be able to give itself permission in some way to do that.
Yes.
And Mark and I, we talk about this oftentimes on D2C. I mean, I distinctly remember a couple of times looking at porn and saying, Brittany should be grateful for this. My wife should be grateful for this. This is going to help me be better in bed. I mean, every addict can probably relate to saying that. I look back at it now, and the clinical term would be that was batshit crazy, but it made perfect sense at the time. Right.
Yep.
And so we become very good at sometimes justifying those things even to ourselves. Right. And so, but regardless of where that lies, right. So is that a potential? Absolutely. And is it common for addicts? Yes, it is. But either way, as you've heard throughout the evening tonight, whatever that may be, in no way does that reduce accountability for change on their end, right? When we work with clients and Dare to Connect, we have clients, addicts, and partners who come from every walk of life, every sort of background, every whatever. But one of the first things that we always teach is what authentic accountability and living in your truth looks like,
Exactly.
and being accountable for the past, even though the fact that we were traumatized, the fact that things weren't modeled for us, those all can give context, because context does matter. Context doesn't diminish the need for change, the need for amends, the need for recourse, the need for correction.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yep.
um, so before we jump into the real quick questions, Mark, if because I think we can cover some of these that are in the chat. There aren't too many, pretty quick. We would like to talk to you guys about our Dare to Connect program for just 2 seconds. Many of you who've listened to our podcast are familiar with the Dare to Connect program a little bit. And tomorrow we'll actually have a graphic that we'll bring up on the screen that can kind of give you a better idea of this. But the Dare to Connect program for addict spouses and couples is not like any recovery program on planet Earth as far as we understand. That's why we created it. It is a live service where on Mondays for addicts, Wednesdays for partners, and Fridays for couples, although everyone's welcome to attend each of those sessions during the week, as well as with our support groups on Sundays, which have 12-step elements built into them. We get together and work on, as a community, as a group, various topics, all things related to recovery, and are able to go in depth on topics like the ones that have come up in these questions tonight, the ones that you see, same thing on the PBSE podcast. Um, Dare to Connect, because it's a live service, doesn't operate on a static list of topics. We formulate and choose topics month to month based on the needs of whoever is enrolled in it at the time. The idea was to create a program that would be there for you in the trenches in real time with you and your partner, helping you in many respects, that in ways that formal traditional therapy can only help, but doing it in a support based way that would integrate elements of a group system, but would give you the biggest bang for your buck when it comes to finding good resources for therapy, access to two therapists with over 40 years of experience, a community of people that you can be with and commiserate with in the chat every single session, and a place where you could tag team with your recovery. Because one of the things that we see with in our individual sessions, even with people, is that too often in therapy, you have a really good hour-long session, right? You talk about some great things, you talk about goals, and what's the struggle for addicts or partners? In a day or two, they start to struggle again, right? And Dare to Connect kind of provides this constant tag teaming with the recovery world, the recovery process, in a way that nothing else that we've seen out there is able to do. And we really love and care and respect so many the people in this group. We value the moderators who are here tonight, some of whom are involved in our Dare to Connect program already with their spouses. And after talking with them and after setting this up for the first time, we wanted to extend a special discount to you guys. I think I threw it once in the chat, but I'll throw it in here again. If Dare to Connect is something that you would like to take advantage of, if you go to, I just put it in the chat there, if you click on and use the link, you can only use that link to get there. Not only will you be able to try Dare to Connect for the first 2 weeks free, which is something that we have kind of as a long-standing offer to everybody, but for the first time, you'll also be able to get half off of your first month with Dare to Connect, which brings the total price point of that to the less of a cost of 1 hour of therapy with Mark or I for 6 weeks of content, which is something like what, 30 some odd hours of Dare to Connect content, in addition to the vast repository of already recorded content that Dare to Connect gives you
Hmm.
access to when you're a member of it. We've launched a number of new programs or sub programs as a part of D2C. One of those we just launched today, which is a self study course that you'll be able to access after a certain amount of time in the program, that takes you through various very difficult to navigate topics like the formal disclosure process with your partner, healthy sexuality, among others. And so if that's something that you are looking to try, if you are looking for additional support and help, if you're wanting to level up your recovery approach, wherever you're at, we've designed Dare to Connect to be for the couple or the individual who's been in recovery for 2 days or 2 years. And that's how we kind of structure it. I could go on about that, but Mark, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think we need to wrap up. We're about
Yeah.
an hour and a quarter in.
Yeah.
Uh, really appreciate all your patience at the beginning as we
Yes. Thank you so much.
are dialing in the technology. We will be doing this again in the morning at
Yes.
10 a.m. Mountain Time. We have a whole other set of questions that some of you have pre-submitted, so we'll be doing that whole other set of questions tomorrow morning, and we will look forward to doing that.
Yeah. Um, Before we go, Mark, is it okay if we just address a couple of these things quickly
If you
with these
want to,
people?
yeah.
And if you need to go, that's okay. I know Mark's got a schedule to keep. I've got a few more minutes, but I just wanted to try address a few of these. Some of these we can address, but they were just kind of follow-up questions. Let's see here. So if we go back up here, Rebecca asked, let's see. What are examples of boundaries? I'm really struggling to set them because I don't know what they are. Um, the best thing that we could say about that, what we could say about that really briefly, is that boundaries are designed to protect what we call the authentic self. Okay, they're designed to express the authentic self in a relationship, and they're designed to fortify and keep that inner authentic self, that person who we are, and that person we're trying to become, safe from external influences as much as possible. So so boundaries can run the gamut of anything from the sexual realm to boundaries around recovery to one's level of engagement, etc. And they incorporate a lot of other thoughts involving safety in a relationship and that kind of thing.
And I think there was a PBSE podcast link given by the moderators
Good.
for episodes we did on boundaries.
Okay, perfect. So that
Yep.
was one that we wanted to be we wanted to address briefly. Let's see here. We covered a couple of these others. Da, 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 If Nikki K asked if they have a quote unquote type, meaning if addict partners have a quote unquote type, does that still lie within quote unquote novelty? It's hard to live up to an impossible standard. I guess the only thing that I would say about that is Mark and I have both spent a lot of time working in the chemical addiction treatment world, running IOPs and different things like that in that world. And when I was running an inpatient program or helping to run an inpatient program for addicts who were struggling with alcohol, every alcoholic can give you an example of like their quote unquote favorite drink of choice, right? I love 63 Chardonnay or whatever the case may be. But if you take an alcoholic who loves 63 Chardonnay, and if you isolate him from his 63 Chardonnay and you isolate him from any other traditional forms of alcohol, those are the guys that we would catch breaking into the janitorial closet at 3 a.m. and we'd have to discharge from the program because they knew that we kept the rubbing alcohol for cleaning purposes in there, and they would drink it knowing that there was a 50-50 shot it would cause blindness, which it does. And the reason why I use that as an example is because we see the same thing happen in the addiction world. Every addict, quote unquote, and myself included, Mark and I, we had types throughout the years or whatever. But you got to remember at the end of the day, when you pull back the wall behind addiction, when it comes to sex and porn addiction, for example, it has very little to do with the sex and the porn. Some of the most intense pornography that I ever saw was the first exposure I had to underwear catalogs and the J.C. Penney catalogs that would come in the mail, right? It has so much less to do with a type and much more to do with, can the brain get something to stimulate itself? At the end of the day, it's looking for an escape and it will pursue anything in pursuit of that. Okay. It will cross all sorts of boundaries in the pursuit of that. So, yes, can a guy have a type? Does that fall within novelty? Yes, it sometimes can. But at the end of the day, the most important message there is that the brain just wants to numb out. Okay. And it will use anything it can to do that.
Yep. Yep.
Um, let's see here. Looking through here, I think we're pretty close to the end. I think Scotty McFloof, I love that name. Asks, can we answer is it too late to submit questions? And I think a moderator responded, "You're welcome to put that in the chat. Moderators can grab that. We'll try to get to it, though we offer no guarantees, unfortunately, because we do already have a lineup of questions for tomorrow." Um, so with that in mind, I think we covered the big ones there.
I think so.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for being with us, taking the time again. Like Mark said, thank you for your patience with the beginning of that. If we run into the same problem tomorrow morning, I'm going to do my best to work on the tech side of things. If we run into it, we'll be able to correct it immediately. If I can't get the right link to pop up, I'll be able to get you an alternate link the minute you guys come in. So it won't take 15 minutes. It'll take two. So
Yeah, exactly.
we will get it figured out. And again, we hope that you guys will take advantage of that Dare to Connect offer if you feel the desire to. We'd love to have you over there. Come check it out, see what it's all about. And thank you for your time. And we look forward to seeing all of you and maybe more in the morning.
Yeah. Have a great night, everybody.
All right. Bye bye.